Hi, today I want to talk to you about pressure you use when you're printing to take the impression. So I've talked a little bit about it if you've watched some of these previous videos where I've been printing on the printing press and I've been using white card, and the white card controls, it fine-tunes the pressure of the big weight coming down on the print. I actually have 7 pieces of white card, and when I do a print I decide how much pressure I want. The more pressure I want, the more pieces of card I use. The less pressure, the fewer pieces of card. If you remember, with this very lightweight Kitakata paper, I'm actually only using 3 pieces of card. So that's kind of how I do it on the printing press, but there are other things to think about. So if you have a look at the lino here, which I haven't done anything to since my last film, you'll see that up in the sky I've actually left 2 bits of cloud. Now, I think I said in the last film that I cleaned out the cloud, but that's not strictly true because these 2 bits are still there. Now, I have left them there not because I want to ink them up again, but I've left them there to balance the flat weight of the press. So if you think of my printing press as having a big weight, the sort of size of the print, if I were to cut away everything on one side of the lino, when the weight comes down, it will tilt because there's no lino there to support it, and it will tilt down towards the place where there's no lino and up on the other side. And that means that if I lose everything up here, everything down here will stop printing well because there's nothing balancing the press. So leaving little bits in to balance it is something that I do all the time. But if you are in a similar situation, word of warning, it's absolutely fine to leave a shape that is a whole shape that's already been printed. But if you say you wanted to get rid of these hills and you thought, I'll take out the bottom bit of the hill, but I'll just leave this top bit for balance, you need to be really, really careful. If you clear out this bit and leave the top bit, you need that edge there to be really well smoothed off and chamfered into a nice slope, because if you chop off here with a hard edge, you will get a hard edge embossing onto your print. It will show. And the other thing is that if you want to do this business of leaving a bit behind in order to balance the press, you need your print to be bone dry before you start printing again with these spare bits, because what will happen if you don't is that the lino that's not inked, that's just there for balance, will pull ink off the print and it will stay on the lino. Worst case scenario, it can actually pull at the paper, especially if you're using water-based inks. Not so much a problem with oil-based, but water-based inks. So just, it works really well for balancing the pressure, but you need to do it carefully so that you don't emboss and you don't pull ink back off the print when you're using it. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to talk to you about is if you're hand printing. And with hand printing, the pressure that you apply by hand is still really important in terms of when to go hard and when to go light. So if you are printing a really delicate area, you'd think you'd want a sort of specific pressure. So I've got a couple of things here that I've talked about before. I've got a plastic Baron, plastic disc Baron. I've got a very cheap student grade bamboo Baron here. You can get these from printmaking suppliers. If you want lists of suppliers, they're on my website in the resources section. And also a spoon is great. But you'd think, let's say, for example, you wanted to print the branches of the tree by hand, and these are all very delicate, then your best bet is not to go with something like a spoon where you're putting a specific weight down. It's far better to go with something wider and larger that will go over the top, and just take your time and use a little bit less pressure, because this will hold the paper flat over as you print the detail, whereas a spoon is going to start pushing the paper down into the sort of areas in between. So if you're hand printing, just think about the amount of pressure that you are putting on the print as you go. It shouldn't always be the same amount of pressure. So in fact, if I wanted to get a really good impression of a larger area, then I'd bring the spoon in and I'd be rubbing away to get that heavy pressure. So it's worth just thinking about stuff like that when you're printing. Obviously it'll depend a lot on the paper that you're using and the inks and so forth, but just play with different pressures. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to pressure is how you handle, supposing you want to put a layer of one colour across your print and some bits are delicate and some bits are solid areas. That's kind of a bit tricky. Let me get you a print to show you. So this print of the Lake District here is called Open Sky, and for very good reason, because there isn't any lino here. There's only these very delicate cloud shapes, which are just basically little lines. And then there's a whole foreground bit here. So in order to print the colour, the greeny colour of the lines in the clouds, which is also, it's one of the, if not, I think it's the first colour that I printed on this one. I can't remember, I think so. So this is the first colour, so it's going to go onto the area where the clouds is and then all over everything else in the foreground here. So the way that I do that is I do it in 2 stages. So what I do is I will ink up the foreground area and I will put the print through the press on really high pressure, no ink in the delicate area, just in the foreground area. And I'll put it through on a high pressure and I'll give it some welly and drag on that press and really get a good impression of the large piece down here. Then, when that's printed, I'll ink up the delicate area, same colour, put it through the press again, and this time I'll just dab the press down with very little pressure so that I get a nice clean impression there. So you just do it in 2 stages and it does the job. Looking at this, I seem to remember that what I did to balance the press was to leave the sky where it was while I dealt with the rest of the print to get an even pressure over everything. So that's just a little quick few ideas about pressure on the printing press. I hope you found that useful and I hope you'll join me for another film. Thanks a lot. Bye.